My fiancé said while standing outside our new house. I'm not sure this life belongs to me. I returned the keys to the realtor, accepted a contract in another country, and months later, she realized the quiet goodbye had been permanent. I'm not sure this life belongs to me. She said it quietly, not in a fight, not with tears running down her face, not in the middle of some massive argument where words fly out before anyone can catch them. She said it standing on the front porch of the house. We had just signed papers on that morning. The keys were still in my hand. The realtor had driven away maybe 4 minutes ago. The autumn light was hitting the front yard in that golden way that makes everything look like a postcard. And Claire was standing there with her arms wrapped loosely around herself, staring at the oak tree in the front yard, and she said those 10 words like she was reading them off a weather report. Flat, distant, certain. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at her profile, the way her jaw was set, the way she wasn't looking at me, and I think some part of me, the part that had been quietly paying attention for the last year and a half, already understood exactly what she meant, but the rest of me wasn't ready to accept it yet. So I said, "What does that mean?" And she turned to look at me finally, and there was something in her eyes that was harder to read than sadness. It wasn't grief. It wasn't guilt. It was something closer to exhaustion. Like she had been carrying this sentence around for a long time, and she had finally just decided to put it down. Right here, on this porch, in front of this house I had spent 11 months searching for. "I don't know," she said. And the worst part was that I believed her. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I am 34 years old. I had been with Claire for 4 years at the point this story begins. We got engaged 14 months before this moment. That is the only context you need for now. The house had been my idea, not entirely. Claire had agreed, enthusiastically at first, to the idea of buying something together rather than continuing to rent. We had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment for 2 years. Good building, decent location, but it always felt temporary to both of us. Or at least I thought it felt temporary to both of us. Claire worked as a graphic designer for a mid-sized advertising firm. I worked in project engineering, infrastructure contracts, mostly commercial builds. We were stable. We were not rich, but we were careful with money, and by the time we got engaged, we had saved enough for a solid down payment. I had a spreadsheet. 3 tabs. The house we eventually bought was not the Craftsman bungalow. It was a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street. Good school district. Not that we had kids yet, but we had talked about wanting them eventually. Big backyard. The oak tree in the front. Decent bones. It needed some cosmetic work, but nothing structural. The offer process had been stressful. We'd lost 2 bidding wars in the months before. When our offer on the colonial was accepted, I had called Claire from the parking lot of a grocery store and said, "We got it." There had been a pause on the line, a beat longer than I expected, and then she said, "Oh, that's great. Not bad. Not dismissive. Just measured." I told myself she was tired. She'd had a rough week at work. I told myself a lot of things in those months. Closing day came on a Thursday. We sat across from each other at a long table and signed our names approximately 47 times. The realtor, a cheerful man named Holloway who wore the same blazer every time we met him, kept making small jokes to ease the tension. Claire smiled at the right moments. She held my hand when we walked out. She let me take a photo of her holding the keys in front of the door. She was present for all of it, but there was something underneath the performance that I had learned to notice. A kind of stillness. Like she was watching herself do all of these things from a slight remove. Like she was an actor who had shown up fully prepared but wasn't sure she believed the story she was in. I noticed it. I filed it away somewhere I wasn't ready to open yet. And then Holloway drove away, and the afternoon light came down through the oak tree, and Claire stood on the porch with her arms around herself, and said the thing she said. "What does that mean?" I had asked. "I don't know," she had said. We stood there for another minute without speaking. The street was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere a few houses down. I turned the keys over in my hand. The little key ring had a small metal house charm on it. Holloway had given it to us as a closing gift. "Are you saying you don't want this?" I asked, and I kept my voice very level when I said it. Claire unfolded her arms and put her hands in the pockets of her jacket. "I'm not saying that," she said. "Then what are you saying?" She looked at the house instead of at me. "I'm saying I walked through that door, and I looked around, and I waited to feel something, and I didn't. I absorbed that. Sometimes feelings come later," I said. "I know. It's a big day. Closing days are stressful. You're probably—" "I know," she said again. Not impatient. but not inviting me to continue, either. We went inside eventually. We ordered food because we hadn't thought to bring anything. We sat on the floor of the empty living room because we hadn't moved furniture yet. We ate in a kind of careful quiet. And later that night, lying on an air mattress we'd inflated in the master bedroom, I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and thought about all the versions of this day I had imagined. None of them had looked like this. We moved the furniture in over the following weekend. Friends helped. Claire's college roommate Tess came and made everyone laugh and kept the energy up. My coworker Connor brought his truck and his unshakable cheerfulness. By Sunday evening, the house looked like a home. Boxes everywhere still, but lived in. Claire's plants on the windowsill. My books on the shelves. The couch in front of the fireplace. Everything where we'd agreed it should go. Tess hugged Claire goodbye at the door and said, "You two are going to be so happy here." Claire smiled and said, "I hope so." I was carrying an empty box down the hallway, and I heard that exchange. "I hope so." Not "we will be." Not "I know." "I hope so." I kept walking. The weeks after the move were ordinary in almost every way. We unpacked. We bought a new dining table. We argued mildly about where to put the second bookshelf. We had people over for dinner. We talked about paint colors for the guest room. On the surface, nothing was wrong. But I had started to pay a different kind of attention. The clinical kind. The kind you deploy when you've been warned that something is there and you can't unsee the warning. I noticed that Claire never called it home. She called it the house. "I'll meet you at the house." I left my phone at the house. The house needs a new shower curtain. Never home. I didn't say anything about it. I just counted it. I noticed that when we had the dinner party, Claire was radiant and warm with our friends. And then the moment the door closed behind the last guest, she became very quiet. Not sad exactly. Just absent. Like she'd been running on performance fuel and had finally let it run out. I would do the dishes. She would sit on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading. And the space between us would grow wide and careful. I noticed that she had started going on long drives alone on Saturday mornings. She'd always been someone who liked solo time. I'd respected that about her. But the drives were getting longer. 2 hours. Sometimes 3. She never said where she'd been. I never asked. I'm not sure why I didn't ask. Maybe I was afraid of what she'd say. Maybe I was afraid of what she wouldn't say. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in early November, about 6 weeks after we moved in. I had come home from a long site visit, tired in the specific way that physical work in cold weather creates, the kind of tired that lives in your shoulders and the back of your neck. Claire was in the kitchen when I came in. She had made pasta, which meant she'd been home for a while, which meant she was either in a decent mood or she was trying to soften something. I noticed the bottle of wine already open on the counter. We sat down. We talked about nothing much for the first 10 minutes. Her project at work, a neighbor who'd come to introduce himself, the grocery list we kept forgetting to complete. And then the conversation shifted in the way conversations do when someone has been waiting to say something. There's a quality to the pause. A change in air pressure, almost. "I've been thinking," Claire said. "About what?" I said. She turned her wine glass slowly in both hands. "About us. About everything." I put my fork down. "Okay." She looked up at me. "I think I've been going through the motions for a while now. And I don't think that's fair to you." I stayed very still. "How long is a while?" She hesitated. "A long time," she said quietly. The kitchen was warm. The pasta was getting cold. I thought about the Craftsman bungalow. About the pause on the phone when I told her we'd gotten the offer accepted. About the porch. About "I hope so." "Are you telling me you want to end this?" I asked. "I'm telling you I'm lost," she said. "And I think I've been lost for longer than I knew." That's not the same answer. I know. Silence. "Do you love me?" I asked. Not angrily. Just directly. She looked at me with something that might have been pain. "I love who you are," she said. "I love that you made a spreadsheet. I love that you care about things properly and completely. I love so many things about you." But she shook her head slightly. Not a denial. More like she didn't have the right word yet. "I don't know who I am in this life," she said finally. "In this house. With this future. And I think I agreed to all of it because I love you. And I thought that would be enough, and I'm scared that it isn't." I sat with that for a moment. What would be enough? I asked. "I don't know." "What do you want, Claire?" She was quiet for a long time. "That's exactly the problem," she said. "I genuinely don't know." We didn't break up that night, or the night after that, or for the next several weeks, actually. What happened instead was something more gradual and maybe more honest. We had the conversation, and then we had it again, and again, variations on the same core exchange, circling the same central wound. She didn't know what she wanted. She felt lost. She felt like the life we were building together was a life she'd agreed to intellectually but hadn't chosen viscerally. And I, for my part, kept asking the wrong question. The question I kept asking was, what can I do? Like if I could identify the broken part, I could fix it. Like this was a structural problem and I just needed the right blueprint. She kept telling me, with more patience than I probably deserved, that it wasn't a problem I could fix, that it was something she had to figure out inside herself, that my wanting to solve it was actually part of the problem. I didn't fully understand that yet, but I was starting to. I want to tell you about something that happened at a work function in mid-November. A company dinner, not our company, but a client firm, at a restaurant downtown. Claire came with me. She wore a blue dress I'd always liked on her, and she was charming through the entire dinner. On the drive home, she was quiet, and at some point, stopped at a red light with the city moving around us, she said. Do you ever feel like you're performing a version of yourself? I glanced at her. Tonight. No. In general. Like the person everyone sees and expects is not quite the person you actually are. And at some point the gap between them gets so wide you can't figure out which one is real. I thought about it genuinely. Not in the way you're describing, I said. She nodded slowly. I know, she said. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. The light changed. I drove, and the silence that followed wasn't hostile, but it was honest. She was describing herself, and somewhere in describing herself, she was also, gently, describing why we didn't quite fit. Not because anything was broken, not because anyone had done anything wrong, but because she had been building a version of herself to match a life she'd agreed to, and the real version of her, the one that drove alone on Saturday mornings and stared at ceilings and said, I hope so, instead of, I know. That version had been sending signals for a long time, and I had been choosing not to receive them clearly. The end came in December. It was not dramatic. There was no screaming. No one threw anything. No dramatic revelation of betrayal or cruelty. We sat in the living room on a Sunday afternoon with gray winter light coming through the windows, and we were finally honest with each other in the full, unqualified way that honesty sometimes costs you everything. She said she thought we needed to separate. I said I'd been thinking the same thing for 3 weeks, but hadn't been able to say it. She cried a little. I did too, briefly. We talked for a long time. We were kind to each other. We did not pretend that kindness made it less devastating. By the end of the conversation, something had been formally named and therefore formally closed. For years, an engagement, a house, a life we'd been constructing together piece by piece. Named and closed. Here is the part that surprised people when I eventually told them. I did not fight for the relationship. Not at the end. I had tried, in my way, for months, trying to solve it, trying to understand it, trying to be patient with it. But when she said the word separate on that Sunday, something in me recognized that the fight was over. Not because I had given up, but because I understood, finally, that what she needed could not be given to her by someone who loved her. She needed to find out who she was when she wasn't trying to fit herself into someone else's vision of a good life. And I needed to stop building things for a future that someone else wasn't certain they wanted to live in. The logistics were complicated. The house was the biggest one. We had been in it for less than 2 months. We'd barely unpacked. Selling immediately would cost us. The market wasn't great. There were conversations with a financial advisor. There were conversations with both of our families that I will not detail here, because they are not my story to tell in full. Claire's mother cried on the phone with me and said she was so sorry. My brother said nothing useful but drove 3 hours to sit with me for a weekend, which was exactly the right instinct. And in the middle of all of this logistics and grief and reorganization, I got a phone call from a colleague named Barrow who ran a division in our parent company's international contracts. He'd been trying to fill a senior project lead position in their Copenhagen office for 4 months. He'd come to me once before, maybe 2 years earlier, and I'd said no. I had Claire. I had the apartment. I had the life we were building. Copenhagen was not part of the plan. But now it was December, and I was sitting in a house I owned half of and didn't know what to do with. And the plan had been formally closed. So when Barrow called and said, I know the timing is odd, but I want to ask again, I didn't say no immediately. I said, tell me about it. The contract was an 18-month position, renewable if both sides wanted it. Senior infrastructure lead on a large mixed-use development project. Good money. Good experience. Copenhagen was, by most reasonable measures, a genuinely excellent city. I had never been. I spent 2 days thinking about it. And then I called Barrow back. I said yes. I told Claire. We were still living in the house at that point, technically, though she had been staying at Tessa's apartment for parts of the week. We'd agreed I would buy out her share of the equity over time, or we'd sell. Nothing was finalized yet. She came over to pick up some things, and I told her I'd taken the Copenhagen position. She stood in the hallway with a tote bag on her shoulder and looked at me. How long? She asked. 18 months to start. When do you go? February. She nodded slowly. That's good, she said finally. That's really a good opportunity. I know. Are you okay? She asked. And I almost laughed. Not cruelly. Just at the particular absurdity of where we had arrived. Not entirely, I said. But I will be. She looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable. I'm sorry, she said. I know, I said. I didn't mean to. I know, Claire. She nodded. She left with her tote bag. I stood in the hallway of the house for a few minutes. And then I picked up my phone and called the realtor. Holloway answered on the second ring. I told him I needed to return the keys. There was a pause. The whole listing, he said. Yes. Another pause. Okay, he said, in the careful tone of a professional who has seen most things. Let's talk about next steps. I drove to his office the next day. I handed him back the key ring with the little metal house charm. He didn't make any small jokes this time. He was professional and thorough and kind. And when I walked out of his office into the cold December air, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than that. Clarity, maybe. The specific clarity that comes when you stop pretending that a situation is what you wanted it to be and start dealing with what it actually is. January was the month of endings. I sold or donated most of the furniture that was mine. I packed what I was taking, mostly clothes, my laptop, a few books, a small framed photo that had sat on my desk for years. My brother came to help. We didn't talk much. We worked. And at some point he looked around the nearly empty space and said, You doing okay? Getting there, I said. Copenhagen's a good city, he said. I've heard that. Cold though. I know. He nodded. We kept packing. I want to be honest about what those last weeks in that city felt like. Because I think it would be easy to tell this story as though I was calm and clear-eyed and resolute the whole time. I was not. There were nights that were genuinely terrible. Lying on an air mattress again. The same one from closing day, some cosmic joke. In a house that was now almost empty. Listening to the sounds of a neighborhood I'd barely gotten to know. There were moments when I questioned everything. Whether I'd been too passive for too long. Whether I'd missed something I should have seen earlier. Whether, if I'd been different in some specific way, the outcome would have been different. I turned those questions over a lot. I didn't arrive at clean answers. But eventually I arrived at this. I had loved her genuinely. I had built toward our future in good faith. I had missed some signals because I had been reading the signals I wanted to see instead of the ones that were actually there. And she had stayed in something she was uncertain about because she didn't want to hurt me. Neither of those things was a crime. Both of them had cost us something real. That was the truth, as honest as I could make it. I flew out on a Wednesday in the first week of February. Early morning flight. Gray dawn. The cab to the airport was driven by a man who talked for the first 10 minutes, and then, when I gave only short answers, went quiet and drove without complaint. I appreciated that. At the gate I sat with my bag at my feet and my hands loosely clasped, and I looked out the window at the planes moving in the early light. I thought about the porch. The oak tree, the key ring with the little metal house charm. And then I thought about Copenhagen, which I had now read enough about to picture. The canals, the old architecture, the particular northern light, the bicycle lanes, the cold that my brother had mentioned. A city I had never been to. A project I had never seen. A life I had not planned. Something in my chest that had been tight for months loosened very slightly. Not all the way, but some. The gate opened. I picked up my bag. I got on the plane. Copenhagen in February is exactly as cold as advertised. The kind of cold that is precise and unapologetic, that finds every gap in your jacket and reminds you that this is not a warm weather continent. But there is something honest about that cold. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. I found that bracing, in the literal and figurative sense. The project offices were in a building near the harbor. My team was a mix of nationalities, Danish, Dutch, German, a couple of Australians. One Canadian named Fletcher who immediately became the person I had coffee with most mornings. The work was good, hard in the right way, complex problems with real stakes and a team that knew what they were doing. I arrived thin, not physically, but in the way people go thin after grief. Stripped of the extra layer. But I worked well in that state. I always had. The first 3 months were about pure logistics and adjustment. finding an apartment, learning which grocery store was closest, figuring out the bike lanes, which, in Copenhagen, are serious infrastructure and not something you treat casually. Learning enough Danish to be minimally functional, though nearly everyone in the city spoke excellent English. Learning the rhythms of the project. Learning my team. I called my brother every week. I called my parents less often, but regularly. I did not call Claire. This was not hostile. It was practical. We had no unfinished business between us. The house had been sold. We'd agreed on that before I left, and Holloway had moved efficiently. We were both, in the clean legal sense, free. Calling her would not have helped either of us. So I didn't. And she didn't call me. Spring came to Copenhagen in a way I hadn't expected. After those February months of clean gray cold and short days, the city transformed almost violently into color. Green erupting from every available surface. Longer evenings. People outside in ways that suggested they had been starved for it. I started running along the harbor in the mornings. I started cooking again, something I had done a lot before Claire, and then somehow done less and less during the later part of our relationship. I made friends. Slowly, in the way adults make friends, through repeated proximity and the gradual accumulation of shared experiences. Fletcher and his partner had me to dinner. There was a woman on my team named Ingrid who had a dry, unhurried sense of humor that I grew to look forward to. There was a group from the project who sometimes went sailing on weekends in the summer. I went twice. I was terrible at sailing. I enjoyed it enormously. Life continued. It does that. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that it does, and then one morning you realize you haven't had to remind yourself in a while. It was late April when the message came. I was at my desk. The harbor was visible from the window. The message was from Claire. Short. Careful. It said, "I heard you're settled in Copenhagen. I'm glad. I've been thinking about you, and I wanted to reach out. I hope it's okay that I did." I read it twice. I put my phone face down on the desk. I looked out at the harbor for a while. I picked up the phone and wrote back. "It's okay. I'm settled. Work is good. Hope you're well." And then I put the phone down again and went back to what I'd been doing. Her reply came an hour later. "Can we talk sometime? Not about anything complicated. I just miss your voice." I sat with that message for the rest of the day. That evening, walking home along the canal, I thought about what I actually felt when I read it. I expected to feel pulled. The way you get pulled back towards something familiar, even when familiar isn't right. But what I actually felt was something more measured. Not coldness. Not anger. Not even sadness exactly. Just a quiet, settled awareness of where I was and where she was in the distance between those 2 points. She missed my voice. That was real, probably. Feelings don't turn off cleanly just because the situation changes. But missing a voice and wanting the life that came with it are two different things. She had stood on a porch and said the life didn't feel like hers. That hadn't been a momentary doubt. That had been the truth. And I had heard it, finally, and I had made my decisions accordingly. I got home. I made dinner. I wrote back. "I need some more time before I'm ready for that. I hope you understand." She replied, "I understand. Take your time." I appreciated that. I closed the app. I opened a beer. I watched the last of the light go out over the city from my apartment window. The summer was the best part of that first year. The light in Copenhagen in June barely fully leaves. By 10 at night, it's still a kind of dim amber blue that doesn't feel like real dark. The whole city stays out later than seems reasonable. The harbor fills with swimmers. There are festivals and outdoor concerts and long evenings in courtyards with people you've begun to trust. I worked hard. I ran most mornings. I got marginally better at sailing. I called my brother, and we talked for an hour one Sunday about nothing in particular, which is the best kind of conversation. And one afternoon in late June, sitting outside with Fletcher after a long site visit, he said something offhand that I've thought about since. We were talking about the project, about how a structure that looks simple from the outside often has hidden complexity in its foundations. And Fletcher said, "The foundation work is always the least visible part, but it's the thing that determines whether everything else holds." He was talking about the building. I was thinking about something else entirely. Tess reached out in July, Claire's college roommate. She sent me a brief message saying she hoped I was doing well and that Copenhagen sounded incredible. I thanked her and asked if Claire was okay. It felt like the right question to ask without asking too much. Tess took a few hours to reply. When she did, she said, "She's okay. She's going through some things. She moved to a smaller apartment. She's been doing a lot of thinking." I said I was glad she had some space to do that. Tess said, "She talks about you sometimes." She says she didn't know how much had been yours until it wasn't. I read that line several times. Didn't know how much had been yours until it wasn't. I understood what that meant. The house, the future, the plan, the structure of the life we'd been building. She had let it go because she wasn't sure it was hers. And in the letting go, she had discovered that a significant portion of what had felt stable and certain in her days had actually been made of things I had been providing. The spreadsheet, the plan, the forward motion, the certainty about where we were heading. I had been load-bearing, and she hadn't fully understood that until the load was gone. I didn't say any of that to Tess. I just said, I hope she finds what she's looking for. And I meant it. There was a moment in August. I was on a video call with my mother. She was asking about the apartment, the food, whether I was sleeping properly, all the things mothers ask. And at some point she said, "Do you ever regret going?" I thought about it genuinely before answering. "No," I said. "Not even a little." "Not the way you mean," I said. "I regret that the relationship ended. I miss parts of it. But going, no. Going was the right thing." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You always did know when to stop building something that wasn't going to hold." I laughed a little at that. "I don't know if that's true," I said. "It is," she said. "You just sometimes take a while to get there." Fair enough. The message from Claire came in September. Not short this time. Long. The kind of message that takes a long time to write and a long time to read. I'm going to paraphrase rather than quote it directly, both for privacy and because the specifics matter less than the shape of it. She said she had been doing a lot of work on herself. Therapy. Honest conversations with people who knew her well. Time alone in ways she hadn't allowed herself before. She said she understood now things she hadn't understood then. She said she'd spent a lot of the spring thinking the separation was a pause. That I had gone to Copenhagen as a kind of mutual step back. That we would reconnect when I came home. That there was a version of this that still ended with us. She said she'd been telling herself that story for months. And then, somewhere around July, she had realized that the story wasn't true. That I hadn't gone to Copenhagen to wait. I had gone to Copenhagen to live. And that she had said goodbye to me. And I had heard it. And I had arranged my life accordingly. In the quiet way I had done that. No ultimatums, no dramatic scenes, no angry declarations. Was somehow more final than any of those things would have been. She said, "I think I assumed that if it ended quietly, it could also start again quietly. I didn't understand that some quiet endings are permanent." She asked if there was any version of this where we could try again. She said she didn't want to push if I had moved on, but she needed to ask. She said she was sorry for how long it had taken her to understand what she had. I sat with that message for a long time. A very long time. I sat with it on the couch in my apartment with the September light coming through the window and the sound of the canal outside. And I noticed what I felt. Not absence of feeling. Not indifference. I felt something real and complicated for the person I had spent 4 years with. I always would. That doesn't go away cleanly. But underneath that, solid and quiet, was something else. An awareness of who I had been for the last 8 months. The running. The cooking. The bad sailing. The coffee with Fletcher. The long evenings in the northern light. The work that was hard in the right way. The growing sense that I was not performing a version of myself. That the person waking up in the city was the actual person and not a draft of one. I thought about the porch. The 10 words she had said. "I'm not sure this life belongs to me." And I thought about what had happened since. She had let go of that life. And I had let go of it too. And in the letting go, I had found something that felt more mine than the previous version had. Not because the previous version had been bad, but because it had been built around holding something together that was quietly asking to be released. I thought about all of this for a long time. And then I wrote back. I wrote, "Thank you for telling me all of this. I mean that. It took honesty to write it. I'm not angry with you. I don't think I've ever really been angry with you. What happened between us happened in good faith on both sides, and I know that. But I have to be honest with you the way you've been honest with me. I didn't go to Copenhagen to wait. You're right about that. And when you said what you said on that porch, I heard it the way you meant it, even though it took me a while to fully accept it. And once I accepted it, I made my choices accordingly. I'm not saying this to be cold. I'm saying it because you deserve a real answer and not a soft one. I hope you find what you were looking for when you stood on that porch and couldn't feel what you expected to feel. I genuinely hope that. But I don't think the answer to that search is me. And I don't think it's us. You need to find out what the life that belongs to you actually looks like. And I think you already know that it's not the one we were building together. Take care of yourself. I mean that fully. I reread it twice. I sent it. I closed the laptop. I got up and put on my jacket. I went outside and walked along the canal for a long time in the early autumn air. The light was doing what Copenhagen light does in September, warm and angular and a little elegiac, like something ending gracefully rather than abruptly. I walked until my shoulders came down from wherever they'd been. And somewhere along that canal, in a city I hadn't planned to live in, on a continent I hadn't expected to find myself on, I registered something that felt like peace. Not happiness exactly, not closure exactly, but the specific feeling of having said the true thing to someone you cared about, and having said it clearly, and having let it land. I'm writing this in December, 11 months after I left. The 18-month contract has been extended by mutual agreement to 2 years. Copenhagen is, as my brother noted, cold. It is also, and I say this without sentimentality, one of the finest places I have ever lived. I have a good team. I have a decent apartment with a view of a canal. I have coffee with Fletcher on most mornings. I can now sail in a way that is only slightly embarrassing rather than genuinely dangerous. I have not spoken to Claire since the message exchange in September. I don't imagine I will for a long time, if ever. There's no malice in that. Just the honest acceptance that some chapters close, and the attempt to reopen them is not kindness. It's something else. I think about the porch sometimes. Not obsessively, but the image returns now and then. The afternoon light, the oak tree, the key ring with the little metal house charm, her arms folded around herself, the stillness in her face. I'm not sure this life belongs to me. I've thought about it from enough angles now to understand what was happening in that moment. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. She was being honest, maybe for the first time, about a doubt she'd been carrying for a long time. And I had a choice in that moment. I could have argued it down, reassured, problem solved, held on harder. Instead, eventually, I listened. Not on the porch. It took months. But eventually I heard what she was actually saying. And the hearing of it, really fully hearing it, changed everything. There is something I want to say carefully. Not as a lesson, not as advice, just as something I have come to understand. The quiet goodbye is not nothing. People tend to think that the endings that count are the loud ones. The fights, the ultimatums, the slamming of doors. But some of the most real endings happen in the space between words. In the measured pause on a phone call. In the I hope so instead of I know. In the standing on a porch looking at a tree instead of at the person beside you. Those quiet moments carry information. The choice is whether to receive them. I chose, eventually, to receive them. And the person who returned the keys to the realtor and got on a plane to Copenhagen and learned to make his own meals in a foreign city and found that his actual shape, the real one, not the one he'd been fitting into a shared space, was different from what he'd thought. That person is doing better than I had any right to expect. That's the story. No villain. No dramatic revelation. No moment where someone is proven wrong in a satisfying way. Just two people who were in each other's lives completely and honestly, who turned out not to be built for the same future, who figured that out slowly and painfully, and then, finally, let each other go. And the life I have now, small in some ways, uncomplicated in the good way, actually mine. Holloway, the realtor, sent me a Christmas card. He does this for all his clients, I assume. It was a generic holiday image with his name and his firm's logo and a line that said, "Wishing you and yours a happy holiday season and a prosperous new year." I almost threw it away, but then I kept it. I put it on my kitchen windowsill, next to a plan I had managed, against most reasonable expectations, to keep alive for 6 months. There is something about that card that makes me smile, not because of Holloway, but because of the "and yours." I don't have a yours right now, not in the way he meant, but I have a city, a canal, a team, a slightly improved sailing ability, a brother who drives long distances when it matters, a mother who says true things plainly, a sense of who I am when no one else is defining the parameters. That's a form of yours, a life that is mine, not despite what happened on that porch, because of it. She thought she was telling me she was uncertain. She was actually telling me something was over. And when I finally understood that, I did what I should have done the moment I heard it. I let it be true. I returned the keys. I got on the plane. I let the quiet goodbye be permanent. And somewhere over the Atlantic, at 37,000 feet with the dark ocean somewhere below me and a city I had never seen waiting on the other side, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in a year.